Dear you, I'm writing to you from a version of yourself who remembers the quiet ache of feeling like you were slowly fading into the background of your own life. You weren't disappearing physically, you weren't withdrawing intentionally, but little by little, you felt yourself dimming, your voice becoming softer, your presence feeling smaller, your needs slipping behind everyone else's. Like a shadow in a crowded room, you existed, but you didn't feel seen. You moved through your days as if watching them from a distance, trying to convince yourself that blending in was easier than taking up space. I remember how that feeling crept in silently. You stopped sharing your real thoughts, not because you didn't have them, but because you doubted whether they mattered. You held back your emotions, not because you didn't feel them, but because you didn't want to take up too much room. You agreed to things you didn't want, softened your reactions, disguised your disappointments, all because somewhere along the way, you learned that being small meant being safe. But it wasn't safety you felt. It was loneliness. A quiet, subtle loneliness that didn't stem from being alone, but from not feeling present in your own story. There were moments when you watched yourself laugh and wondered why it felt empty. Moments when people spoke to you and you nodded automatically, even though your mind felt detached. Moments when you sensed a heaviness in your chest, the weight of holding yourself back constantly. You wondered if people would notice if you stopped showing up emotionally. You wondered if they saw you, or just the version you carefully presented. You didn't fade because you lacked worth. You faded because life taught you, again and again, that being visible sometimes led to hurt, misunderstanding, or pressure. And so, without realizing it, you dimmed your own light to avoid being overwhelmed. I saw how deeply it affected you. I saw the confusion in your eyes when you felt disconnected from yourself. I saw how desperately you wanted someone to notice that you were there. Not just physically, but emotionally. And I saw the quiet grief you carried, knowing you weren't living fully, but not knowing how to step back into the spotlight of your own existence. You weren't weak for fading. You weren't wrong for protecting yourself. You were simply trying to survive in the only way you knew. Your past self understands now why you slipped into the background. It wasn't because you lacked personality or passion. It wasn't because you had nothing to offer. It was because you spent years prioritizing the comfort of others over the truth of yourself. You didn't want to inconvenience anyone. You didn't want to ask for too much. You didn't want to be too emotional, too opinionated, too complicated. So you tucked parts of yourself away, piece by piece, until you didn't realize how much was missing. You dimmed yourself to avoid conflict. You softened yourself to avoid rejection. You silenced yourself to avoid vulnerability. But here's the truth your past self has learned. You were never meant to be small. You were never meant to be background scenery in your own story. You were never meant to hide the parts of yourself that make you human and whole. Fading wasn't a flaw. It was a response to being misunderstood, a response to feeling pressure, a response to emotional exhaustion. You weren't disappearing. You were retreating. You were gathering yourself. You were waiting, hoping for a moment where it felt safe to be fully you again. Your past self sees now that fading was also a sign of emotional misalignment. You were surrounded by spaces where your depth wasn't appreciated, where your silence was overlooked, where your heart wasn't understood. In environments that don't nourish your authenticity, shrinking becomes a survival instinct. The fading wasn't proof that you had no light. It was proof that you were in the wrong rooms. Your mind also began disconnecting because you lost touch with your own desires. When you spend so long prioritizing others, you forget what you want. Your voice becomes unfamiliar even to yourself. And when you don't hear your own voice clearly, you naturally step back. But the most important truth your past self wants you to understand is this: your light didn't disappear. It's been waiting, quietly, patiently, for the moment you choose yourself again. Now, I'm speaking to the version of you here today, the you who still feels like you are emerging slowly from the background, the you who still hesitates to take up space, the you who fears being too visible or too vulnerable. Take a gentle breath. Let it fill your chest. Let this truth settle softly inside you. You are allowed to step into your own life again. You are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to take up space. You don't have to fade to be loved. You don't have to shrink to be accepted. You don't have to soften yourself to be safe. Your presence carries weight. Your voice has meaning. Your feelings deserve to be heard. Little by little, you are returning to yourself. Every honest moment, every boundary you set, every emotion you allow yourself to feel, every truth you speak, even softly. These are the ways you begin to step forward again, not into the spotlight for the world, but into the warm glow of your own authenticity. You don't need to make a dramatic leap. You don't need to reinvent yourself overnight. You don't need to force confidence. You only need to show up as yourself, one small moment at a time. And every moment you do, you reclaim another piece of the light you thought you lost. Your life is not happening without you. You are re-entering it with clarity, with softness, with strength. Soon, you will feel present again, not as the person others expect, but as the person you've always truly been. Your light was never gone. It was waiting for you to trust it again. And you are learning to slowly, tenderly, bravely. You are not fading. You are rising. You are reappearing. You are becoming whole again. Sincerely, you